My firm is called Math Studies, and today the talk is challenges. Without sounding a bit too pompous or heroic, I think it's okay. Now I think I'm set. It's address. I think there are actually today I went through quite heavily focused on the great speakers previously. There's obviously overlapping preoccupations and interests and symptoms and therefore challenges. I think it's actually, we're not actually overcome this, but I think it's a way to kind of address shared concern. First, identity. I'm going to show you, I'm going to go through projects that addresses different sort of issues. It's a region that is south of, okay, let's see. Southern Korean peninsula, there's the largest island, volcanic island, which was mainly agricultural and fishing and also tourism. And about 10 years ago, the regional government had a kind of ambition to create something, knowledge industry. So, and then they create this kind of a flat land, man-made tabula. So this was where we were asked to design a company headquarters for 350 people, now very successful. What is compared maybe Korean WhatsApp and also Uber, Korean version of it, also with a portal site. So it was hard to just imagine a building in the middle of nowhere that has a length about 800 meters, gently sloping. So we kind of actually developed an idea to kind of develop a grammar that maybe this building is composed of the very simple element, in this case structure element that is kind of combined almost like a Lego block, and maybe sometimes it could create a simpler building, and the initial, the first building is actually probably the most complex sort of thing with sort of common purpose facilities such as auditoriums and playrooms and so on. So, and this is actually you can see the top of volcanic 2,000 meter mountains, and it's quite unknown for geological site that is world supposedly the longest calcite tunnels and other some quite dramatic geographic features are there, and also the color. We kind of use the pigmented concrete, the ochre color that comes quite common as a sort of a geological condition there. And it was also a way to kind of create a village-like atmosphere for this kind of, first, initially it was quite isolated, almost like it is office park-like situation, but without sort of creating some kind of a romantic, almost picturesque approach to it. And it was a quite systematic and systemic sort of a way to do. And the second one I'm talking about is actually, land itself is actually made completely man-made, reclaimed land for the last 20 years. In fact, 20 years ago, I was living in Rotterdam for a company called OMA, and this was my last project, urban design competition that we have won, and so that was a good ending for me. So since I came back to Korea 15 years ago, I've been able to observe this kind of how this flat man-made territory, probably the largest in Korea, has been growing. And one of the tasks that was given to us was actually like a ruin after 2008 economic crisis. And this was 540-meter long urban block that was had already basement of triple levels because of the crash. This large shopping mall project was dead, and it was meant to be you work as a connected tissue from where you're looking at, which is a subway station toward further distance. There are 4 universities such as Utah University and New York State and so on. And what we did was, what we are addressing here was a mobility situation, because most of the Korea, I think it's a lot in common in this region too, that the speed of the city is quite polarized. So you have this human walking speed versus the very high speed, mostly car-centric city. And this was also very unusual for Korea, that now we are kind of retrofitting those bicycle lanes and so on for all cities, but this city with a 21st century vision that came with already bicycle lanes and so on, although people are not using it that way much in practice, but hopefully I thought this would be an interesting way to demonstrate these sort of what I call it PUV, friendly city, personal utility vehicle, as opposed to SUV. So electric wheelchairs and segways and scooters and bicycles and so on. So idea was actually to create almost like an infrastructure project. This project has more than 200 restaurants and shops. We didn't, this is also, again, we talked about this session about value engineering, but another, probably the largest project, bigger, cheapest, and also the fastest project we have done. And so we also thought this, I mean, also this is kind of a top-down urbanism. There's no neighborhood whatsoever existed, but we kind of allow every business just come in and just do their, of course, now each brand comes with their space, identity, and so on. So, but what we're concerned about was a sort of like overall identity from outside, and then create almost like a large public platform. And that is connected by three-dimensional sort of infrastructure, what we call loop, that connects to the basement to the top level of the shopping mall. So immediately it was quite successful that people with baby stroller come in. And also we even have a sort of a small soccer field for children. And people start to use this space quite really like an urban space. Especially it was quite needed for this area because, you know, still kind of in this kind of a formation of it. And then the idea that we kind of develop and try to sort of appeal to a public official is that actually this could be the next, on the side there will be towers, varying size, so it could also be a potentially like almost pre-made Highline type of situation that they can actually mutually benefit each other. The higher part that rises up, it has 8 cinema spaces for a Cineplex. So it kind of has a nice addition to this flat, almost Dutch-like condition that it created almost like an artificial hill. And then we go to Seoul City, where we're based. Over the last 100 years, the Seoul has grew population-wise about 50 times. So first 50 years, 10 times, and then the next 50 years, 5 times. Actually, the last 20 years, population-wise, has been shrinking. So it's not only growing. This is 100 years ago. This is the sort of current stagnated state. And when I'm just going to go through very quickly about the density. And density, obviously, is we all know that it's a very sustainable way to create a human settlement, say. But when the city used to be horizontal, I'm just going to go through kind of like a chronological crash course of what happened on a horizontal surface. There's up to not so long ago, two decades ago, there were rather autocratic regime, and then but you know street life was still lively, and you know there's lots of small lively neighborhood, and so on. I think early 2002 when we had a World Cup hosting gig, this was first time that people demonstrated they can gather, occupy street in masses without angry purpose, but actually was very delirious kind of euphoric moment, which ignited many of the public space design. So it does actually design public space, which I see a lot of beautiful examples here, is quite recent for us. In fact, the previous speaker, the Zaha Hadid space, is also one of the best demonstration of that, the recent one. And I'm showing exactly a year ago when there's this as many as 2 million people candlelight demonstration in the wintertime for 14 weeks every Saturday, which kind of leads to a political change also recently this year. However, in the contrast, same other direction was happening, the density vertically, as we know, these situations doesn't really help socially. It's almost somehow, I think there is a sort of a theory that during these 70s and 80s, it was deliberate to make it depoliticize people kind of offering this lonely typology, what I call it, that has a great view. And I think that from the beginning, our agenda was also one of the sort of a series of work was dealing with this high-rise situation that is more sociable and creating a much, let's say, more urban sort of a condition. And that could be applied to kind of on an individual unit level and also, but mainly about the common space that is shared for more social interaction. So we've done a series of these investigations through real projects and sometimes speculative projects these tower, you can see, we call it a bundle tower, and that has sort of like a social bridges that you can outside, and also you can go outside almost every floor, and you can kind of compare other buildings next to it that has a complete compressed sort of appearance that was built in the 80s and 90s. And also the same idea can be applied in a much smaller operation. The larger one was 36-story, and then the later actually we've done only 10-story building in a different fabric of Seoul with the low-rise buildings, and that is a micro unit, so less for the younger people. The more minimum space you need, actually you would need a more common sort of internalized urban experience, I think. So it was actually quite well appreciated. And continuing with that, I'm showing you one project that we've been almost now getting into a completion stage. It's a dormitory project for university. And this was actually quite exciting because we often, with developers, we had to fight for increasing common spaces, corridors and so on. Of course, the architect's skill is measured by how to get the maximum private sellable unit. But in this case, it was almost an ideal situation that students are sort of obligatory spend years, a couple of years to sort of be part of an academic community. And for us, typically, we had to deal with these kind of another polarizing situation of what was around already built, and we saw was this kind of a two-person standard room versus large sort of collective space. But we thought that was problematic, and then we wanted to create a more spectrum of very small individual room to large collective space. So this was given, top is given a situation, that corridor that nothing happens. And then what we sort of changed was we suggested to create a double bed room so that the size of each bed comes out to the hallway. So you create these pocket spaces that could be appropriated and used by students. And we thought this would be also an interesting way to introduce civil ways to interact with how to appropriate this kind of a semi-public, semi-private spaces with their neighboring students. So also this project was quite challenged because Korea is 70% of mountains. So in this case, city of Daejeon is all mountain, and this university existing campus is in the middle level of mountain, and there's a 27-meter drop, about 7-story high level drop, and there's a road that we have to maintain in the middle. And idea was upper level is where the cherry blossom trees are lined, and which is very well liked as a sort of pedestrian-only main sort of spine of the university. So we had to, we come up with, within the site, we come up with a sort of courtyard scheme that is spilling down from the landscape, but then we realized we have to create some kind of a parallelogram shape. And then we create this kind of a typical unit module applied to it. Then it becomes like a pixelated parallelogram. So basically, that's a compressed 600 student capacity, and then corridor with the pocket space, and then it become parallelogram, and then adjust to this 27-meter drop. So interesting thing about this building is that it's 10-story building. Typically, when you build this dormitory type of building, first 1 or 2 level has a common space, and the rest is all individual. But because of the landscape situation, you have lower 4 level is boys, and then the top 4 level is female students, and then in between 2 floors, between these 2 territories are the common space. So that's sort of the section that you're looking at. So this is elevation that, that has this unusual situation that this large common space is inserted in the middle of a sandwich between this sort of village-like, what we call a situation. So that's the boys section. And then because of this operation of creating this skewed courtyard in plan, you get this pocket space also, but then you get this sort of a zigzagging alleyway-like condition. So most of those student sort of sleeping area comes with this interesting alleyway-like situation. We're almost close to the completion, so that these pocket space can be used for study group rooms or also laundry facilities and so on. Sometimes it has a taller double high space. And we also intentionally pull out this washing area outside, so actually they can interact in the morning. This was a large model that we built. It was part of an exhibition we did 3 years ago. So I'll just walk you through this lower level. And then the 5th floor is where it actually creates a complete loop, which is a common what we call student hub. And then the challenge also, so structurally we use this, we have to span this over the road, so then we get this giant 30-meter long trusses that kind of suspends the floor. And then another level up is also largest, most collective space, that is for Canteen. Is another 30-meter long truss that supports the top 3 levels. And that has both views toward the campus and toward outside. So this is probably the most common view that people will experience from the campus level. It's quite deceptive. And it's actually the girls' part that emerges from the campus, and the boys' part, the lower part, is almost same scale, but in a very different appearance from the campus level. So I think this just shows a diverse scale in this sort of 600-room, 600 people's house, which I'm very happy to see what will happen, how they will use this space. And then the next couple projects are not architecture projects, and that would be the end of it. We also sometimes do non-architecture projects. Actually, quite continuously, we do projects that are nothing to do with actually creating a business. But in this case, I was a curator for Venice Biennale. And something that kind of had to touch on the political issues, because it was 3 years ago, the theme at the time was Rem Koolhaas, who was a main director for the show. And it was the first time he kind of gave a mandate that every country has to deal with theme under absorbing of modernity from 1914 until 2014. So the absorbing modernity, the story is very, would have been very different. It was maybe 50 years ago, because then I can deal with only South Korea. But Korea was divided 65 years ago, and before that, 64 years ago. And before that, 100 years ago was a Japanese colony, but it was one country. And of course, this country had more than 10 centuries of singular entities, so shared history. So somehow, although I know nothing about North Korea, but I feel obliged to tell the story on both sides. So somehow I had to come up with an idea that I had to, we were contacting through third parties because there's no, not allowed or not possible to have a direct contact with North Korea. And it was through many countries, ambassadors, diplomats, UN, with the diplomatic ties with North Koreans, and also people along the way, first 8 months of preparing this show, we met some incredible filmmakers and photographers and historians and so on. So actually this project, what we presented at the Venice on-site was not successful show in a way that we didn't make it to plan A, which is direct contact with North Korea and put together something communicating through architecture and put together some kind of a show. So not by both Korean architect, but about the both Korean architecture by, at the end, 39 participants from 14 different countries. And somehow we got received the result. And so we had a good result of getting a major recognition from the show. And then it became a project that kind of doesn't stop almost because, and it kind of traveled back to Korea and then back to New York. And then for me, this was the opening kind of an event, but I was able to bring these people from different regions that has a common element, which is architecture and urbanism in Korean Peninsula to actually meet in one place. And then somehow that also, I think it became an important moment that spawned many different gatherings and intellectual exchanges and so on at different places and still going on, and I'm very happy about that. But one of the most, for me, important event was 2 months after the event opened in Venice, actually. It was a sudden visit by North Korean ambassador from Rome, visited with his daughter, guided by one of the participants who is Milanese photographer, Alessandro Belgiojoso. And it was very kind of kind exchange with a South Korean lady who's a manager who did with Dawson's and so on. So this is the last project under this environmental challenge, but it's actually continuation. For me, it's a personal sort of almost obligation to continue with this kind of work. And it wasn't, it was a speculative, this is a speculative project that it wasn't initiated by me, actually, in this case, but it's initiated by an artist, Choi Jae-eun. She kind of came up with this idea. She's a Tokyo-based, very well-admired Korean artist that she often deals with the environment. But as you may have known, this border between South and North Korea, about 300 kilometers long and 4 kilometers wide, is probably the most untouched land over the last 64 years by humans after the war. So therefore, it's kind of a gift for out of unwanted gift that come out of this tragic history, which is still ongoing. That it is one of the most ecologically diversified location of 6,000 animals and plants, and including more than 100 species that are in danger now. So she came up with this idea of not touching at all, especially also this area is one of the most heavily planted with 3 million landmines during the war. So it's quite not so accessible, but maybe this was her work together with Shigeru Ban, good friend of her. They kind of collaborate together, and this picture is last year Architecture Biennale in Venice. And it was she kind of suggested it's creating a passage through the DMZ. And this is what we call Jeongja, traditional pavilion with good viewing spot, like gently touching the nature. And her idea was just crossing this 4 kilometer wide zone with a small passage that is hovering, and maybe every kilometer or so there will be these Jeongja pavilions sort of observe and pause and have maybe particular function, but mainly the idea was to preserve this territory in a much more sensible way. Because now already area around this DMZ, especially South Korea side, the land price is going up, and of course it really depending on the political situation. And what she as a sort of an imaginary client, she asked me to do was both end of south and north, both end of this passage that she created with the Shigeru Ban. She wanted me to come up with the seed bank and one end with ecology library. First, I wasn't quite familiar with that, but then I actually went to Wakehurst in near London. There's this Millennium Seed Bank, first image. And then, of course, these are very important sort of things that now for the biodiversity and so on. And it's popping up all around the world. It's almost like a time capsule or Noah's Ark. And also the second one is Svalbard in Norway that they excavated 300 meters below. And I mean, mainly it's protect these lives, seas from human disaster, as you probably know. And then another thing about this library element, we thought it was it's a completely related story. Someone talked about the copyright, but I think for the last 20, 30 years, this, I think with the proliferation of GMO and overly accessible application of this intellectual copyright, I'm totally against fake chairs and so on, but about the medical area and agriculture and so on, that kind of has been also threatening what is considered to be the commons. And I think some of this recent thing about this knowledge vault, that also has to do with how the information is proliferating, doubling up the amount every 2 or 3 years. Never something like that happened in human history, but it's really become what to select and what to keep becomes so important. Another issue is that these things are also these digital informations are quickly obsolete, these formats. So you have to have this data migration every 4 years, and you lose lots of information. So this is one of the examples that in Vienna that uses salt mine to kind of create this vault for knowledge. So what my suggestion was, instead of this having two ends that she suggested, there is this military, the tunnel that was created, discovered by South Koreans. So it's obviously, you know who did it, in the early 70s. And that is about 3.5 kilometers long. And so the lady in the middle is the artist, and on the left is another architect who's part of Pavilion project, quite respected architect. What the interesting thing about this tunnel was that what we discovered was this is military demarcation line, and then this is the northern limit line, 2 kilometer offset, and the southern line, it's gently sloping constantly 5% of slope, which explains it started from north side, and because water has to drain when you excavate the tunnel. And then, but what's fascinating is that it's actually northern side has more than 500 meters deep underground because it has a higher mountain. So it's actually, we realize, a perfect location for almost better than Svalbard situation. And then southern part where you have to, what we designated, end up designating vault for knowledge, where you turn all this important selected digital knowledge into almost like a Rosetta Stone of current time, which is in an analog format. Sometimes they use this 35 millimeter film or also tiles and so on that last more than 500,000 years. That would need a much less weather control, so we decided to put knowledge vault on the South Korean side. And then interesting thing was that also we discovered was the military demarcation line is where the ground surface is closest to the tunnel, only 10 meters. And then we realized it's not a coincidence because back then these wars about occupying higher plateaus, and it created lots of casualties in the valley. So when the war suddenly had to stop, a lot of borderline falls into valley area. So these are what it looks like without getting through too details. And basically what we did was we're suggesting to have this tunnel intact, except each archive, a collection, one about the nature, the other one is about the culture, knowledge, grow from the center where these two man-made lines, a border and the tunnel intersects. And and then it's almost symbolic, but also there's some function to it. We thought it would be also opportunity to do a little intervention, which is opening up the land to expose the tunnel level to sky. And it's almost like a landscape acupuncture, we call it. And then we create almost like a passage spiraling down from the ground surface. And that is not for the men, but it's mostly for the animals to come down. And because these this tunnel will be mainly work as a storage. And then above, we're showing these two pictures from north and south about this DMZ, currently the joint security area where these two blue buildings are just sitting right at the borderline, where they meet for the military discussion for the military dispute. So this could be our circular space, the acupuncture space could be also another type of this third zone in between, but mostly it's occupied by animals. But once in a while, maybe two research, sort of a lab, workers can accidentally meet or arrange, have a meeting. And then this area is also has a spring. About 500,000 ago, there was a volcanic eruption, which is one of the reasons why 60% of the migrating birds are coming by every year, because the water is warm, although the temperature is minus 40 degrees. So basically the diagram is that there's a center, and then it grows from both directions of knowledge and the seed, the life. And then you will need two labs to support that, preparation facility to create this archive. And this is for seed, from inspection to vacuum packaging. And then this is knowledge process. And then, I mean, we're getting close to it, but idea is to actually create this circular space with precision quarry machine. So it's actually, and then each stone, the largest piece that is carryable by this helicopter, has a capacity of 13 tons. Each stone is about 5 meters and 2.5 by 2.5. And it carries to each location. This is the crane's view at the hot spring. And then these stones, there will be about 200 or so stones will be excavated, and they will be flown to both locations. And we kind of imagine, of course, these can change. I think we're just bringing this up as a discussion with North and UN and the rest of the world. And this is what we imagine, this location for a preparation facility for seed vault. And then this is a south part. And this kind of, and then the idea was that we maybe South Korean architect and North Korean architect can collaborate to create this building for this both, on both sides. And then, and this is one of the Korean, probably what we call the most important building, a natural shrine that has a large granite plinth. So there's a border you're looking at, and the Panmunjom is a one way to interact. And then even up to, there is a 10 years of very peaceful moment between South and North Korea. Up to 9 years ago, we are able to play golf at this North Korean territory, Kumgangsan region, one of the most beautiful mountains. And then until last year, actually there was a city of Kaesong, I had a friend who lives in Seoul who goes to North Korea, Kaesong City, to supervise the factory workers and come back every night. He cannot bring any USB or anything back. There's a strange rules, but there's this overlapping area. And of course, there is this railroad that is disconnected, which makes South Korea almost like a island now, but hopefully we can be traveling all the way to London or even Dubai if this happens. And then there's this archaeology ruin. I don't have time to get to, but other, and then this, her passage in our vaults could be another way to sort of work like a suture. And I think we are actually, she's recently, I think she already did it, but submitted this kind of proposal to two departments of UN about the peace and one about the ecology. So we're actually in a still campaigning stage. So keep the fingers crossed. And thank you for bearing with me. I think time's up. So thank you so much. Yeah.